Hello and welcome to the lecture on how to differentiate instruction. There are many ways to differentiate instruction. I'm going to provide some additional resources. So this lecture is really intended to just give a snapshot of differentiating instruction. And then for the assignment, I'm going to ask you guys to use a UDL-based lesson plan or a UDL-based Universal Design for Learning based template to evaluate a lesson to get a little bit more into how to plan for universal design for learning. One of the things we know is that inclusive classrooms work well when the principles of differentiation and universal design for learning are applied, in that the lesson planning, the methods, the instruction, the delivery, they all consider multiple pathways for learning. The essential questions for this are pretty straightforward. What is differentiating instruction? What's universal design for learning? And how do these apply in the classroom? So we'll go over each of these. So some things to consider just before we get started, just to take a minute to think about, is what does it mean to differentiate instruction for students? And why is it important to differentiate instruction for all students? So the first one is important in that we often talk about differentiating instruction, but we also want to make sure that we have a clear idea of what that looks like in the classroom. Again, I'm just going to provide a small snapshot here, but the more developed that understanding can be of exactly what it looks like and how to describe it, the more we are able to show other teachers and parents and administrators what that looks like. And then consider that we're going to talk about why it's so important to differentiate instruction for all students. So Carol Ann Tomlinson, who I would consider the queen of differentiating instruction, this is what she says about differentiating instruction. At its most basic level, differentiating instruction means shaking up what goes on in the classroom so that students have multiple options for taking in information, making sense of ideas, and expressing what they learned. In other words, a differentiated classroom provides different avenues to acquiring content, processing or making sense of ideas, and to developing products. And so be thinking about those big ideas, and this is what you're going to be asked to evaluate or prepare a lesson for, depending on what you choose for assignment number 2, is making sure that we're looking at lessons or developing lessons or coming up with ideas in ways that students have multiple pathways in these 3 different areas. And this is how it's going to share some similarities with universal design. So for more information about universal design, you can go to www.cas.org. The way these online presentations work is that each time an animation appears, there's a new slide. So that's what you'll see in the next few slides. It'll build on this current slide. So this is what Universal Design for Learning says in a nutshell, that if we plan for a range of different abilities, strengths, and needs at the design stage, we spend less time trying to retrofit the lesson during or after instruction. So the big ideas of Universal Design is if we make our lessons or plan our lessons more accessible from the outset, then we spend a lot less time running around trying to decide how we're going to make it accessible for the students. And then by providing multiple pathways for student learning, we use multiple means of presentation, engagement, and product to reach more learners. So I want to be clear that universal design and differentiating instruction are very similar, but folks from universal design and differentiating instruction would certainly say that they are different concepts. The reason I'm including them together in this lecture is because I want to include both concepts in a short period of time, and they both apply in general to the same big ideas about creating access for students with disabilities. So I included this cartoon. This cartoon is by Michael Giangreco, and he is a gentleman who writes all sorts of funny cartoons about the interesting things we do in the field of special education. And so this is what makes me think about differentiating instruction and universal design. So I wanted to include it for you as well. And so the student using the wheelchair says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" The custodian says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." And then the student using the wheelchair says, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." And that's what I think about universal design and differentiating instruction, is we're shoveling a ramp, maybe not just for students with disabilities, but even if we're shoveling the ramp and clearing a pathway to content and curriculum for students with disabilities, we end up opening the door for more students as well. So I'm going to reiterate this multiple times, so bear with me. It's going to directly relate to the assignment you have in terms of differentiating instruction. So universal design is multiple methods of presentation, participation, and expression. And so differentiation is going to use some different words, but really it's those three central concepts. Am I providing multiple ways to present the information? Am I providing multiple ways for the students to engage in the content? And am I providing multiple means of expression, or some people call it product or assessment, but it's those three ideas or pathways that I want you to keep in mind as we move forward. Again, just showing it a little bit of a different way, multiple options for presentation of content, engaging in the process, and developing a product. So how do we apply these concepts through menus based on learning preference? And so there are many ways that you can apply the concept of universal design and differentiated instruction. You can do learning preferences such as multiple intelligence theory. You can use some concepts of Bloom's taxonomy. And I'll provide some links for you where you can find out a little bit more about how to differentiate instruction in these ways. I'm certainly can answer any questions you have about particular books that would be helpful in this area. So this one is going to use Sternberg's intelligence preferences. And so we're going to look at these three different preferences and how we might be able to design what's called a menu based on these learning preferences to differentiate instruction. So the analytic intelligence is really what we think about as the schoolhouse intelligence, so the linear kind of typical ways of learning. Practical intelligence would be the contextual intelligence, preference for seeing how and why things work in the world as people actually use them. And then creative intelligence, so use of problem solving, preference for making new connections, and so on and so forth. So when you think about developing this menu, or if you're going to use this menu, try to challenge yourself and include the learning preference, each of these learning preferences throughout the menu. So here's what the menu looks like. The menu format is the appetizers. These are negotiables. That means you provide 2 to 3 assignments or project options, and the students must choose one to complete. The main dish is imperative. That means all students complete the main dish. The side dishes are also negotiables. There's 2 to 3 assignments or project options students must choose, and desserts are optional. Usually these are formatted as high interest assignments that students are motivated to complete once done with the rest of the menu task. So some teachers might use menus in a lesson. Other folks might use menus throughout a week. So I just recently worked with a group of teachers who use menus for mathematics, and the students take the entire week to complete the menu. Okay, so this is just a brief example of what a menu might look like. And you can see that for brevity, I've left out the desserts. As a teacher or an instructor, you have some flexibility. There are no real hard and fast rules to this, other than that we want to think about access and multiple pathways for kids. We want to think about differentiation and universal design. We start with our standard, of course. I did not include it on this slide for simple aesthetic purposes, and I didn't want everything to be too squeezed in. But certainly you want to think about connecting your lesson objectives as well. And then you're just going to have some options throughout. Again, you might have this done throughout the week. You might have it done throughout a couple of days. But this allows you to contextualize how you might provide choice for your students. And when you're introducing this in a classroom where students are not used to it, you they may need a little bit of time to adjust, which means you may not want to provide choice all the way through at first. You may want to provide a few choices and then continue to um, include more choices as the students get more comfortable with those choices. So that's the end of the lecture, but I've provided some links and some additional documents that are going to outline differentiating instruction and universal design in a little bit more elaborate way. I've also included a lecture by Dr. David Rose that provides some more information on universal design concepts.